The Galactic Combat Academy was a marvel of interstellar innovation, a sprawling complex orbiting the luminous twin suns of the Orion Nebula. It was here that the most formidable warriors of the galaxy were forged. From the venomous Arcara, whose scales could reflect laser fire, to the towering Gorthons with their biomechanical enhancements, the Academy drew elite recruits from dozens of species. It was a place of prestige and fear, where survival of the fittest was not just a principle, it was the law. The Academy's corridors buzzed with activity as cadets hurried to their next simulation or training drill. Metallic walls gleamed with a faint iridescence, the result of an alloy found only on the distant moon of Varick 7. Holographic displays lit up with statistics and tactical maps, while instructors barked commands in dozens of alien languages. Amidst this organized chaos walked Lieutenant James Walker, the Academy's first human recruit. James was not oblivious to the stares that followed him. Even in a facility that prided itself on diversity, he was an anomaly. His physique, while fit and toned, lacked the imposing bulk of the Gorthons or the serpentine elegance of the Arcara. His lack of visible enhancements, no cybernetic limbs, no neural implants made him appear fragile, primitive even. Yet James carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed to unsettle his peers more than his presence. Deathworlder, someone hissed as he passed, the word laced with derision. It was a term the galaxy reserved for species that evolved on planets like Earth, worlds considered too hostile for life by most civilizations. Deathworlders were a rare breed, shaped by environments where nature itself seemed intent on eradicating its inhabitants. To the recruits at the Academy, James was both an object of curiosity and a punchline. James ignored the comment, his boots clicking softly against the metallic floor. He had heard it all before: primitive, backwater, overconfident ape. None of it mattered to him. He was here for one reason: to prove that humans, despite their lack of technological sophistication, belonged among the galaxy's elite. The day's schedule called for a lecture in Combat Strategy Hall B, a cavernous chamber capable of seating over 1,000 cadets. James found a seat near the back, his preferred position for observing without being observed. The room filled quickly with recruits of every shape and size, their voices creating a cacophony of languages and dialects. At precisely the appointed hour, the lights dimmed and the holographic form of Commander Virek materialized at the front of the hall. Commander Virek was a Tarkin, a species known for their towering stature and crystalline exoskeletons. His hologram shimmered with an almost ethereal quality, his multifaceted eyes scanning the room with the precision of a predator. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "Welcome, cadets, to the Galactic Combat Academy," Virek intoned, his voice resonating like a deep bell. "You are here because you are the best your species have to offer. But let me make one thing clear: in this academy, your past achievements mean nothing. Here, you will be tested beyond your limits. Some of you will fail, some of you will break, and a select few will emerge as warriors worthy of the galaxy's respect." The speech was standard fare, a ritual designed to intimidate and inspire in equal measure. Yet James noticed the subtle glances in his direction, the unspoken questions in the eyes of his fellow recruits. Did the human truly belong here? Was he just another casualty waiting to happen? The lecture progressed with a series of holographic demonstrations. Virek dissected historic battles, pointing out the strategies and mistakes that had led to victory or defeat. The recruits watched intently, absorbing every detail. James, however, found himself increasingly restless. While the tactics were undeniably advanced, they relied heavily on technology: drones, automated defenses, and AI-assisted decision-making. To James, it felt sterile, detached from the raw, chaotic reality of Earth's warfare. Midway through the lecture, Virek paused and scanned the room. "Let us see how well you understand what you have learned," he announced. His crystalline eyes settled on James. "You, Deathworlder, stand up." James rose slowly, the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on him. Virek gestured, and a holographic map of a battlefield materialized in the air. It depicted a scenario where a small force was surrounded by a vastly superior enemy. Given this situation, Valera said, his voice sharp, how would you proceed? James studied the map for a moment, his brow furrowing in concentration. The enemy's formation was tight, their firepower overwhelming. The standard response would be to hold position and await reinforcements, a tactic Varek likely expected him to suggest, but James saw an opportunity. I would retreat, James said, his voice calm but firm. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Retreat was a concept that many species, particularly the honor-bound Gorthons, considered cowardly. Varek raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Explain, he commanded. James pointed to a narrow canyon on the map. The terrain here is defensible. By retreating to this position, I can force the enemy to funnel through a bottleneck. Their superior numbers will be neutralized, and their firepower will be less effective. Meanwhile, I can use guerrilla tactics, ambushes, traps, hit-and-run strikes to whittle them down. It's not about defeating them head-on. It's about surviving long enough to turn the odds in my favor. The room fell silent as Virek considered James's response. Then, to everyone's surprise, the commander nodded. An unconventional approach, he admitted, but not without merit. James sat down, feeling the stares of his peers intensify. Some were impressed, others were skeptical. Either way, he had made an impression. As the lecture continued, James couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Academy would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but he welcomed the challenge. Earth had taught him to survive against all odds, and he intended to prove that Deathworlders were far from primitive. The Galactic Combat Academy's simulation arena was a marvel of technological achievement. Towering over the surrounding campus, it was a seamless blend of alien engineering and advanced artificial intelligence. The interior could morph in seconds, creating environments ranging from dense jungles to barren wastelands, all populated by lifelike holographic enemies. It was within these walls that cadets faced the Academy's most brutal trials, a series of tests designed to push them to their limits and beyond. The announcement of the ultimate combat simulation rippled through the Academy like a shockwave. This was the test every cadet feared and anticipated in equal measure. Its purpose was simple survival against overwhelming odds. The results often determined a cadet's standing in the Academy, if not their very future. For Lieutenant James Walker, the simulation represented a chance to silence his critics or confirm their doubts. The morning of the simulation dawned with a palpable tension. The usual hum of activity in the Academy's corridors was subdued, replaced by an air of solemnity. Cadets from dozens of species assembled outside the arena, their expressions a mix of determination and apprehension. Among them stood James, his demeanor calm yet focused. His fellow recruits gave him a wide berth, their whispered comments a testament to their skepticism. Think he'll last 5 minutes? A Gorthan cadet muttered to his companion, his voice dripping with disdain. If that, came the reply from a Arkera recruit, her scaled tail flicking dismissively. Humans are fragile. This test will crush him. James heard the remarks but didn't react. He had long since learned that proving oneself wasn't about words, it was about action. Inside the arena's control room, Commander Virek and his team of instructors observed the proceedings. Holographic displays projected the profiles of each cadet, their vital statistics and combat history laid bare. Varek's crystalline eyes lingered on James's file, the human's relatively sparse record standing out among the galaxy's elite warriors. Do you truly believe the Deathworlder is ready for this? Asked Instructor Talvek, a tall, insectoid being with multifaceted eyes. Virek's gaze didn't waver. We'll see, he replied simply. The simulation doesn't lie. The arena's entrance opened with a hiss, and the cadets filed in, their boots echoing against the metallic floor. James was among the last to enter, his eyes scanning the environment. The space was vast and empty, the calm before the storm. Once all the cadets were inside, the doors sealed shut, and the arena began to transform. In a matter of seconds, the sterile chamber gave way to a sprawling battlefield. Jagged cliffs loomed in the distance, while dense foliage provided limited cover. The air crackled with simulated heat, and the ground beneath their feet felt unsettlingly real. Holographic enemies materialized across the terrain, an army of alien combatants, their features as varied as the Academy's recruits. A voice echoed through the arena, its tone cold and mechanical. Simulation commencing in 3, 2, 1. The battlefield erupted into chaos. The enemies surged forward, their movements fluid and relentless. Cadets scattered, their instincts taking over as they sought cover or engaged in combat. Energy weapons lit up the sky, their brilliant beams cutting through the simulated landscape. Explosions shook the ground, sending debris flying in every direction. James moved with precision, his mind analyzing the battlefield like a chessboard. He ducked behind a fallen tree as a barrage of plasma fire tore through the air, his ears ringing from the impact. Peering through the foliage, he observed his peers. Many were fighting valiantly but inefficiently, relying on brute force or advanced technology to hold their ground. A group of Gorthan cadets formed a defensive line, their biomechanical shields absorbing the enemy's onslaught. Yet their lack of mobility left them vulnerable to flanking maneuvers, and James saw the holographic enemies exploiting this weakness. Elsewhere, AR Kara recruit used her agility to outmaneuver her foes, only to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. James knew he couldn't rely on technology or superior firepower. His edge lay in his adaptability and resourcefulness, traits honed by Earth's unforgiving environments. Drawing on his training, he crafted a plan. He began by luring a small group of enemies into the dense forest. Using the terrain to his advantage, he set traps with the limited tools he had: a tripwire fashioned from vines, a makeshift explosive using a discarded energy cell. The holographic combatants fell for his ploys one by one, their numbers dwindling with each carefully executed ambush. As the simulation progressed, James adapted to the shifting scenarios. When the enemies unleashed aerial drones, he used the terrain's natural cover to evade detection. When they deployed heavily armored units, he targeted their weak points with surgical precision. His movements were deliberate, his actions calculated. Where others fought reactively, James fought proactively, always thinking several steps ahead. From the control room, the instructors watched in stunned silence. The simulation's AI adjusted its difficulty based on the cadets' performance, and James's strategies had forced it to escalate to levels rarely seen. His ability to outthink and outmaneuver the holographic enemies defied expectations. Remarkable, Talvek admitted grudgingly. He's not just surviving, he's dominating. Virek nodded, his expression unreadable. This is what a Deathworlder brings to the table. Adaptability, resilience, the ability to thrive where others falter. Back in the arena, James found himself facing the simulation's final challenge, a towering mech, its metallic frame bristling with weaponry. The other cadets, battered and exhausted, had either fallen or retreated to the edges of the battlefield. James stood alone against the towering foe, his breathing steadied despite the odds. The mech's weapons roared to life, sending a hail of plasma fire in his direction. James sprinted toward the cliffs, his movements a blur as he dodged the relentless assault. Reaching a narrow ledge, he scaled the rocky surface with practiced ease, his fingers finding purchase in the jagged stone. At the top, he spotted his opportunity, a cluster of energy canisters stored near the mech's power core. With calculated precision, James aimed his rifle and fired. The resulting explosion rocked the battlefield, sending a shockwave that knocked the mech off balance. It toppled with a deafening crash, its systems flickering before shutting down entirely. The arena fell silent. As the simulation ended, the environment dissolved, leaving the cadets standing in the sterile chamber once more. Those who had survived were visibly drained, their bodies sagging with exhaustion. James, however, stood tall, his expression unreadable. The doors opened, and the cadets filed out. James was among the last to leave, his thoughts already turning to the challenges ahead. He knew his performance would draw both praise and scrutiny, but he didn't care. He hadn't come to the academy to make friends or earn approval. He had come to prove that humans were more than the galaxy's punchline. In the control room, Valera turned to his team. "Prepare the evaluation," he ordered. "The Deathworlder has exceeded expectations." The aftermath of the ultimate combat simulation was a swirl of emotions and whispered conversations. While the cadets filed out of the simulation chamber, battered and weary, Lieutenant James Walker stood apart. His calm demeanor was the antithesis of the exhaustion etched on the faces around him. His reputation, previously dismissed as an overhyped anomaly, had suddenly become the center of attention. In the Academy's grand mess hall, the usual din of voices was replaced by hushed murmurs. Every table seemed to be discussing the same topic: the human who had not only survived the ultimate simulation but had dominated it. Cadets from across the galaxy exchanged speculative glances, their disbelief palpable. "I heard he took down the final mech with a single shot," said A.R. Kara cadet, her forked tongue flicking nervously. "Impossible," a towering Gorthan interjected, his biomechanical limbs gleaming under the soft lights. "No one's reflexes are that fast, not without enhancements." Seated alone at a corner table, James pretended not to notice the attention. He focused on his tray of food, a bland assortment of nutrient-dense rations designed to sustain the Academy's diverse recruits. Though his outward appearance was composed, his mind replayed the simulation. He evaluated every decision he had made, every move executed, searching for flaws to improve upon. His solitude didn't last long. A shadow fell across his table, and he looked up to see a group of cadets standing before him. At their center was Rylak, a Gorthan whose reputation as a top combatant preceded him. With his broad shoulders and piercing cybernetic eyes, Rylak exuded an air of authority. "You got lucky," Rylak said, his voice a low rumble. "The simulation must have gone easy on you." James set down his fork and met Rylak's gaze. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he replied evenly. "It's called strategy." The cadets around Rylak exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. Rylak leaned forward, his towering frame casting a long shadow over James. "We'll see how long your strategy lasts in real combat." James didn't flinch. "Whenever you're ready." The tension was thick, but before it could escalate, a chime echoed through the hall. The cadets froze as the voice of Commander Virek filled the room. "All recruits report to Combat Strategy Hall B immediately." The announcement ended the confrontation as quickly as it began. The cadets dispersed, murmuring among themselves as they made their way to the designated hall. James followed, his expression unreadable. He could feel the weight of countless eyes on him, but he refused to let it distract him. Whatever awaited them in Hall B, he was ready. The room was already filled when James arrived. Rows of seats faced a massive holographic display, which currently projected a still image of the battlefield from the earlier simulation. Commander Virek stood at the front, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light as he waited for silence. Once the last cadet had taken their seat, he began to speak. "Today's simulation was a test," Virek said, his voice resonating with authority. "A test not just of your combat skills but of your ability to adapt under pressure. Many of you performed admirably, some of you failed, and one of you exceeded all expectations." The room tensed as Virek's gaze swept over the cadets. He gestured, and the holographic display shifted to a replay of the simulation. The footage zoomed in on James, capturing his every move with stark clarity. The room watched in stunned silence as James dismantled enemy forces with calculated precision, his strategies unfolding like a masterwork of improvisation and efficiency. Virek paused the footage at the moment James delivered the final shot that toppled the towering mech. "Lieutenant Walker," he said, turning to face James. Would you care to explain your thought process during this moment? James rose from his seat, the room's collective gaze bearing down on him like a physical weight. He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the floor as he approached the display. For a moment, he studied the frozen image of the battlefield, his expression thoughtful. It was simple. James began, his voice steady. The mech's power core was its weakness. I noticed the energy canisters stored nearby and calculated that a single, well-placed shot could trigger a chain reaction. It wasn't about brute force, it was about precision. Valera nodded, clearly impressed. And what about the rest of the simulation? Your tactics deviated significantly from standard academy protocols. James met Varek's gaze without hesitation. With all due respect, sir, standard protocols are designed for soldiers with advanced technology and enhancements. As a human, I don't have that luxury. I had to rely on Earth's principles of survival adaptability, resourcefulness, and leveraging the environment to my advantage. The room erupted in murmurs. James could feel the skepticism radiating from his peers, their disbelief almost tangible. Valera raised a hand for silence, and the room fell quiet once more. Interesting, Valera said. You imply that our protocols are insufficient for Deathworlders. James hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. I'm saying that they're not optimized for unpredictability. On Earth, survival isn't just about technology, it's about creativity. That's what makes Deathworlders different. The room froze at James's words. The term Deathworlder carried weight, a mixture of awe and derision, and to hear it invoked so confidently left the cadets speechless. But it was what James said next that truly stunned them. In fact, he continued, his tone calm but resolute. The entire simulation felt more like a mild exercise compared to Earth's wilderness training. The silence that followed was deafening. Cadets exchanged wide-eyed glances, their disbelief written across their faces. Even Valera seemed momentarily taken aback, though he quickly masked it. A mild exercise? Valera repeated, his tone neutral. Yes, sir, James said, his gaze unwavering. On Earth, we face predators and environments designed to kill us every day. The simulation was challenging, but it didn't come close to what I've experienced back home. The room erupted again, this time with a mixture of laughter, outrage, and astonishment. Rylak, seated near the front, snorted derisively. Arrogant ape, he muttered under his breath. Valera raised his hand once more, and the noise subsided. He studied James for a long moment before speaking. Lieutenant Walker, your perspective is unique. However, I would advise caution. Overconfidence can be as dangerous as underpreparedness. James nodded. Understood, sir. Valera dismissed the cadets shortly after, but the echoes of James's statement lingered. As the recruits filed out of the hall, their conversations buzzed with speculation. Some dismissed his words as bravado, while others began to question whether there was more to Deathworlders than they had ever considered. James returned to his quarters that evening, his mind already turning to the next challenge. He knew his statement would have consequences, both positive and negative, but he didn't regret it. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like he had truly been heard. Whether the galaxy was ready to listen was another matter entirely. The Galactic Combat Academy was never quiet, even in the deepest hours of the night. Humming machines monitored training grounds, holographic instructors simulated endless battles, and maintenance drones scurried through the halls, ensuring every inch of the facility remained pristine. Yet tonight, a strange stillness seemed to settle over the academy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Lieutenant James Walker lay awake in his quarters, the dim glow of the nebula outside his window casting soft, shifting patterns on the metallic walls. The day's events replayed in his mind, the ultimate simulation, the confrontation with Commander Virek, and of course the statement that had left the entire academy buzzing. Mild exercise, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head at his own audacity. It wasn't arrogance that had driven him to say it, it was the truth. Earth had shaped him into a survivor, and no simulation, no matter how advanced, could replicate the raw, chaotic unpredictability of his homeworld. But now, he was left wondering if he'd gone too far. A chime broke the silence, startling him. The display on his wall blinked to life, revealing a terse message report to Strategic Command Room Alpha. Immediately. James frowned. It was unusual to be summoned at this hour, and the room they had named was reserved for high-level briefings. He dressed quickly, his thoughts racing, and made his way through the dimly lit corridors of the Academy. The Strategic Command Room was unlike any other space in the Academy. Its walls were lined with massive holographic screens displaying maps of distant star systems, fleet movements, and tactical simulations. Seated around a central table were the Academy's top generals, their expressions grim and expectant. At the head of the table stood Commander Virek, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the room's soft blue glow. "Lieutenant Walker," Virek said as James entered, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Take a seat." James obeyed, feeling the intensity of the general's gazes. Each one represented a different species, their forms a testament to the galaxy's vast diversity. There was General Craddock, a Gorthan with imposing cybernetic limbs, Admiral Sivath, a serpentine Arcara whose golden scales shimmered under the lights, and Overseer T-Rel, an insectoid Tarkin whose multifaceted eyes seemed to see everything at once. "I assume you know why you're here," Virek began, his tone measured. James shook his head. "No, sir." Virek gestured, and one of the holographic screens shifted to display a replay of the ultimate simulation. James's performance played out in vivid detail: the ambushes, the traps, the final shot that brought down the mech. The room watched in silence, and James felt the weight of their scrutiny. When the replay ended, Virek turned to face him. "Your actions today have raised questions, Lieutenant. Questions about the nature of Deathworlders, about your methods, and about your statement." James tensed but kept his expression neutral. "And what conclusion have you reached, sir?" General Craddock leaned forward, his voice a deep rumble. "You're not like the others. Most cadets rely on their enhancements, their technology. You, on the other hand, rely on something else, something primal." James hesitated before replying. "With respect, sir, it's not about being primal. It's about adaptability. Earth forces us to think on our feet. Every day we face challenges that require more than brute strength or advanced tools. We learn to survive." Admiral Sivath's eyes narrowed. "And you believe this gives humans an advantage?" James met her gaze without flinching. "I believe it makes us different. Whether that's an advantage depends on the situation." Virek gestured again, and the holographic display shifted to a new image: a distant planet surrounded by a blockade of enemy ships. "This is Valera Prime," he said. "A critical outpost on the edge of galactic territory. But we've been losing ground to enemy forces, and our standard tactics have proven ineffective." The room fell silent as the generals absorbed the implications. James's mind raced. Valera Prime was infamous for its harsh environment: towering storms, acidic rains, and a surface teeming with predatory wildlife. It was, by all definitions, a death world. Virek's crystalline eyes fixed on James. "We want you to lead a team to Valera Prime. Your objective will be to infiltrate the enemy's defenses and secure a foothold for our forces. This mission will require the very skills you displayed in the simulation." James blinked, taken aback. "You want me to lead?" "You're the only one who can," Virek said simply. "Your methods are unconventional, but they may be exactly what we need." The room waited for James's response. He knew the gravity of what was being asked. If he succeeded, he would prove humanity's worth beyond any doubt. If he failed, it would confirm the skepticism of every cadet who had ever doubted him. "I'll do it," James said finally, his voice steady. "But I'll need a team I can trust." Virek nodded. "Choose your team. You leave at dawn." The following hours passed in a blur. James assembled his team carefully, selecting cadets whose abilities complemented his own. He chose Psychra, a Arcara scout with unmatched agility Tovan, a Gorthan engineer whose biomechanical enhancements made him a powerhouse, and Kale, a Tarkin strategist whose analytical mind rivaled any AI. Together, they represented a blend of raw strength, precision, and intelligence. When dawn arrived, the team boarded a stealth cruiser bound for Valera Prime. The journey was tense, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. James briefed his team, outlining a plan that relied on their combined strengths and his own experience with Earth's harshest conditions. As the cruiser descended through Valera Prime's turbulent atmosphere, James felt a strange sense of calm. This was where he thrived, in the chaos, the unpredictability. The mission unfolded with brutal intensity, each step a test of their resolve. They navigated the planet's treacherous terrain, evaded enemy patrols, and set traps that turned the environment itself into a weapon. By the time they reached the enemy's command center, the team was battered but determined. James led the final assault, his strategies confounding the enemy at every turn. When the dust settled, Valera Prime was secure, and the galaxy had its answer. Deathworlders were more than survivors, they were warriors. Back at the Academy, the team's return was met with a hero's welcome. The once skeptical cadets now looked at James with a mixture of respect and awe. In the following weeks, the Academy began integrating Deathworlder tactics into its curriculum, a testament to the impact James had made. For James, the victory was bittersweet. He had proven humanity's worth, but he knew the galaxy's challenges were far from over. As he stood on the observation deck, gazing at the stars, he felt a quiet resolve. Earth had prepared him for anything, and now, the galaxy would have to do the same.